Hello. So today we're going to be talking about Athol Fugard, John Kani, and Winston Ntsona's play The Island. So as with Sizwe Bansi is Dead, which I did a previous video on, you should be seeing a link for it in the top corner up there. Fugard is sort of the official author of this play, but it was developed in collaboration between Fugard, Kani, and Ntshona. So The Island is a very loose Antigone adaptation, but boy howdy is it a powerful Antigone adaptation. So the play was first performed in 1973, and like a lot of Fugard's work, it is very strongly anti-apartheid. The island of the title is actually Robben Island, which was one of the most feared prisons in apartheid-era South Africa. Nelson Mandela was held there for a long time. A lot of political prisoners, people particularly who were anti-apartheid activists, were held in Robben Island. And so it was very much a tool of state repression. And so what happens in The Island, in the play, is we have two characters, John and Winston, played appropriately enough by John Kani and Winston Ntshona. They're two prisoners sharing a cell, and they are going to perform a brief version of Antigone, a scene called the Trial of Antigone. And so what we get through this, we get their own experiences in the prison to a certain extent, but we also get these intersections of what they're encountering with the world of the play, with the world of Antigone, which is going to be recognizable to a theater-going audience. And we've actually got, one of the things that's really interesting here is we've got a kind of aesthetic manifesto or statement of purpose incorporated into this play. Because when Winston first puts on the Antigone costume, which is a wig made out of rope with fake breasts, eventually he gets a necklace they make out of rusty nails on string, and he gets a blanket wrapped around him as a skirt. But when he first puts this on during the rehearsal in the cell, it's just the wig and the fake breasts, and John laughs at him. And so Winston gets understandably upset, and he basically declares that he's not going to do the play. So John says, "Look, Winston, try to understand, man. This is theater." And Winston says, "You call laughing at me theater? Then go to hell with your theater." And there's some more along these lines. But at some point in a little bit, John says, there'll come a time when they'll stop laughing, and that's the time, and that will be the time when our Antigone hits them with her words. And then a little bit later he says, yes, they'll laugh, but who cares about that as long as they laugh in the beginning and listen at the end. That's all we want them to do, listen at the end. And so that's the sort of statement of purpose here for this play, and actually for a lot of anti-apartheid theater, anti-apartheid art, even political theater more broadly, this goal of getting people to listen, and this sort of faith that if you can reach the audience, if you can make that connection, you can change people's minds. So one of the things that we have here throughout this play are these intersections between the experiences of John and Winston and the story of Antigone. So this starts right basically from the introduction of the Antigone story, because initially John is trying to teach Winston the plot, and Winston is having trouble keeping straight who's who and what the relationships are. So John says, I told you, man, Antigone buried Polynices, the traitor, the one who I said was on our side, right? So we've got this interesting... Because Polynices, in the Antigone story, stands against the state, against Thebes, and John and Winston are both political prisoners. So there's that identification between the exile, the downtrodden, the one who's disempowered, and these prisoners. And then he goes on, later he says, the state lays its charges against the accused, and lists counts. You know the way they do it. So again, we've got this shared experience of going through the prison system, this shared experience of how the state and how justice works. And then I'm going to hold off on the end for just a second, because in the last scene of the play, scene 4, they actually perform the play. And I want to talk about the way that they do that. But there's another thing I want to note here in terms of the intersections of their experience with that of Antigone. So they talk about a number of other prisoners that they know, one of whom has just been put in solitary confinement. And so John is sort of trying to get Winston to agree not to cause any trouble, because it will bring down trouble on both of them. And John says, I'm saying don't be hard-assed. You, when Hidoshi, that's their jailer by the way, Hidoshi opens that door tomorrow, say, "Ya boss, the right way." I don't want to be back on that bloody beach tomorrow just because you feel like being difficult. Winston says, okay, ma'am, Johnny. John says, you're not alone in this cell. I'm here too. Winston says, Jesus, you think I don't know that? And John says, people must remember their responsibilities to others. So this is a really interesting bit in terms of the Antigone story, because this is precisely the opposite of what Antigone does from the perspective of characters like Ismene, which is her sister, who Antigone essentially abandons to go off and bury Polynices, and Haman. That doesn't sound right. I can't remember the name of Creon's son and Antigone's fiance. I want to say Haman, but I don't think that's right. Not important. I'll come back to that in a later video I make about Antigone at some point in the future. But that idea of like your responsibilities to others, not abandoning others, that's a significant theme in Antigone. And so we get that sort of concern here. But I want to take you now to scene 4. It's an interesting scene because what we have, initially John comes out and he gives the sort of prologue to their production, giving the backstory and talking about Polynices' war against Thebes and things like this. And then he gives a lengthy speech as Creon. And it's an interesting speech because one of the things that he talks about is the role of the law in terms of authority. And he talks about the law as both a shield that defends the people and a sword that strikes down offenders. So it's an interesting thing from the perspective of a prisoner to be presenting this interpretation of the law. But then Winston comes on as Antigone, and they go through this trial sequence, and ultimately Antigone is asserting the morality of her decision to bury Polynices, as she does in the original play, the original Sophocles. What we get at the end, though, is a slight shift, because John, as Creon, says, take her from where she stands straight to the island. There wall her up in a cell for life with enough food to acquit ourselves of the taint of her blood. And Winston, as Antigone, says to the audience, "Brothers and sisters of the land, I go now on my last journey. I must leave the light of days forever, for the island, strange and cold, to be lost between life and death. So to my grave, my everlasting prison, condemned alive to solitary death." And this is important because in the previous scene, we learned that Winston has a life sentence and he feels this timeless lostness in the island, because we learned that John is having his sentence reduced, so that he's got only 3 months left on the island. And so Winston is there with Antigone in this moment where this space between life and death. And we get this really, really abundantly after that, because it says, tearing off, the stage directions say, tearing off his wig and confronting the audience as Winston, not Antigone, he says, "Gods of our fathers, my land, my home, time waits no longer. I go now to my living death, because I honored those things to which honor belongs." And so we learned earlier in the play that the reason Winston is in prison for life is because he burned his passbook. He burned the reference book that basically was the official record of where black or colored people were allowed to be and what they were allowed to do under apartheid. So people did burn these as a protest, and people served prison sentences for this. And so when Winston says, "I honored those things to which honor belongs," this is an appeal to the humanity of black and colored South Africans. So this is an extremely powerful ending, which would have been a great note to leave off on, but I actually want to take us back to the beginning of this play, because it has an extremely powerful beginning as well. Because the opening of scene 1, at this time in the early 70s, Fugard was really heavily influenced by Jerzy Grotowski, who's a Polish theater director who developed this idea that he called the poor theater. And one of the things that Grotowski did as part of his method was try to make the actors expressive without depending on words. And so different types of sounds, different ways of communicating information were really heavily emphasized. And so we get this at the beginning of scene 1, we get this influence. And this is a lengthy stage direction, but it's a really powerful opening, so I want to read it to you in its entirety. So, center stage. A raised area representing a cell on Robben Island. Blankets and sleeping mats. The prisoners sleep on the floor, are neatly folded. In one corner are a bucket of water and 2 tin mugs. The long drawn-out wail of a siren. Stage lights come up to reveal a mote of harsh white light around the cell. In it, the 2 prisoners, John stage right and Winston stage left, mime the digging of sand. They wear the prison uniform of khaki shirt and short trousers. Their heads are shaven. It is an image of back-breaking and grotesquely futile labor. Each in turn fills a wheelbarrow and then with great effort pushes it to where the other man is digging and empties it. As a result, the piles of sand never diminish. Their labor is interminable. The only sounds are their grunts as they dig, the squeal of the wheelbarrows as they circle the cell, and the hum of Hidoshi the green carrion fly. A whistle is blown. They stop digging and come together, standing side by side as they are handcuffed together and shackled at the ankles. Another whistle. They start to run. John mumbling a prayer, Winston muttering a rhythm for their 3-legged run. They do not run fast enough. They get beaten. Winston receiving a bad blow to the eye and John spraining an ankle. In this condition, they arrive finally at the cell door. Handcuffs and shackles are taken off. After being searched, they lurch into the cell. The door closes behind them. Both men sink to the floor. A moment of total exhaustion until slowly, painfully, they start to explore their respective injuries. Winston his eye and John his ankle. Winston is moaning softly, and this eventually draws John's attention away from his ankle. He crawls to Winston and examines the injured eye. It needs attention. Winston's moaning is slowly turning into a sound of inarticulate outrage, growing in volume and violence. John urinates into one hand and tries to clean the other man's eye with it, but Winston's anger and outrage are now uncontrollable. He breaks away from John and crawls around the cell, blind with rage and pain. John tries to placate him. The noise could bring the warders back in still more trouble. Winston eventually finds the cell door, but before he can bang on it, John pulls him away. So this is a completely dialogue-free opening in which a massive amount of energy, a massive amount of information, and a massive amount of emotional work is being done. Absolutely brilliant.